So I also prefer a roving mic so that I can be able to see my slides. Plus the timer. Luxury of time is not on my side, so I might be a little bit fast, but I will be available to respond to any questions, including Hilda's question about which is the preferred one, which one will not be a burden to your financial cost, as well as when it comes to reporting purposes. Okay, so basically I'm gonna talk about what we do as Acorn, and of course, after reporting, what do we do with the information that we report? What is the beauty in it? What is the juice, and what is the pulp in the information that we use? So that's a little bit about my introduction. So currently head of ESG, Acorn Holdings Limited. I also happen to be the vice chair of the KEPSA, Kenya Private Sector Alliance. And previously to that, I used to be the chief executive officer of the Kenya Green Building Society, an institution where I also served as the founding vice chair. So our training today, is gonna be around environmental social governance. I think I will fly through this because our previous presenters really spoke very well about it. And then I'll talk about Acorn's reporting as a case study. And then after that, I will talk about beyond reporting. So yes, we do report, we adopt some of these standards and frameworks, but then after we adopt those standards and frameworks, what is next with the insights that we have in those reports? And how do we use it? And how do we develop better buildings that can perform better compared to the ones that we currently have? And then of course, we can also be able to see how do we turn brown buildings into green buildings, and then probably is there a premium from turning brown buildings into green buildings? So we can be able to look at all that. Now, what is ESG to Acorn? So basically to us, ESG is all about incorporating what economists might call the externalities, because we are in business to make money. But we are not just in business to make money, but we also have to be responsible for the environment from which we extract the materials or anything else that we use to make the money that we're making. How does it affect the environment? How does it affect the people who we want to consume the products that we send out, and that's what our properties? And how does it affect the community, the people who we rely on, for example, labor, to be able to develop the assets which we want to generate money from? So right now, investors are actually looking at that particular impact from your assets, the ones that build your REITs portfolios. How do they impact the society? And so there are metrics and numbers behind these metrics, so they want to understand them. They want to know whether they are taking their good money and throwing it at bad projects, or they're throwing it at good projects in hope for a return. That's basically what ESG is, and to us at Acorn, that's how we see our investors, based on the interactions and conversations that we have with them and the reasons why they want to invest in the assets and properties that we operate. Okay, so ESG in real estate trends. So there's been a lot of trends, or a lot of stuff that has taken place when it comes to ESG. I won't dwell too much into one of them, but like somebody said, that is it a political drive that we are moving in one particular direction, and then maybe a couple or 3 years later, we're now taking a different direction? The answer to that can also be yes and no, but yes in the sense that, yes, there are matters which are a priority at the moment, and then the intensity of that priority will be enhanced, and then something else will also come up. Because we are living in a dynamic environment. There's a lot of changes. Some years ago, climate change was not a big issue, but right now it's a big issue. It's affecting assets, their value. For example, as we speak right now, considerations are in place to erect a wall on Fort Jesus. Why? Because of climate-related disasters. The sea rise is rising up. So as a national asset, which is very valuable in terms of income generation as a tourism asset, is actually at risk, and so we need to see how we save it. So that's just one example outside what we do at Acorn, but at least it's just a very classic example of some of the trends which are going up. And then again, there are many others which are, of course, affecting the globe. For instance, some of the investors, maybe from where they are, they want to demonstrate that they are reducing emissions to a particular numbers. So you need to demonstrate, or they need to look out and see which assets around the world are able to meet their ambitions. They can decide to go for assets which already meet their ambitions, or they can also target assets which they feel have the potential to be able to meet those targets. They could be slightly greener, and then they can look at the investment which is necessary, compare that investment vis-a-vis the ambition that they have, and then they can make a decision on whether to invest in those particular assets. So now this is your typical method of incorporating ESG. So we've spoken about ESG, but then how do we approach it? How do we do it? What do we look at? Now that's your typical big landscape. It talks, what I want you to look at, I want you to look at that competitive returns bar. You can see with the competitive returns bar, it talks about our conventional investment methods, where we don't care whether there are any ESG related issues with an investment or not. And then it goes all the way up to where it says thematic. So thematic is basically where investors just come in and they say, we don't invest in businesses that have to do with gambling. They shut their minds to just that. So anything else besides that, they don't get involved. So that's thematic. And then there are those which do ESG integration. And then there are those who just look at predominantly impact. How am I impacting society? So you can be across that competitive spectrum. And then there are also other spectrums which don't bring in competitive returns. For example, let's say somebody just wants to do something philanthropic. That doesn't bring competitive returns. But they feel, yeah, we will do it. Maybe it's a property and maybe it houses disadvantaged people. And they don't expect a big return from it. So long as they just meet their costs, that's it to them. Now that's impact. They're helping society, but they don't expect any competitive returns. So that's your spectrum. So you can sit back and ask yourself, as a business, where are you on that particular spectrum? Do you want to transition from one bar to the next bar or the other? That's up to your ESG strategy that you have. But every investor, every REIT sits in one of those bars. Take a greater look at them. I hope you'll get the slides later so that you can be able to see exactly where you are and where you want to transition to. So we as Acorn, I can actually say that we sit where we have both competitive returns, and then we are thematic, and then we also have impact in our investment. How? Because we develop, operate, and manage assets, but we make sure that these assets are affordable. Affordable in the sense that when you combine all the amenities that we provide, we find that that price point is very affordable. Impact, yeah, we do impact a lot in society. For example, the students that we provide student accommodation to, they normally come back to us and say that this is very good accommodation, so we look at that impact. We look at our supply chain, we look at how many female-owned businesses, for example, that we incorporate in our business, because that's deliberate to us. We know that construction or the real estate industry is predominantly male-dominated, even in the supply chain. So we are very careful and make sure that some of the business is directly, proportionately sent, so that we have this redistribution of wealth gender-wise, and we do it deliberately. And then, of course, it brings in competitive returns for us, because we definitely make a money, and that's why we are able to have a coupon rate on our investments within our REITs. Okay. So, like my previous speaker came in and said about our materiality, how did we get started with all this? The first thing was to do a materiality. Who are our stakeholders? Whom do we deliberately want to impact? And also would like to know, for those whom we impact, what is the measure of that particular impact? So now that's our stakeholders. Sorry, so we have a couple, we do have investors, we have lenders, we have creditors, and then we also have regulators, and then you have now your community. So this is how we see our stakeholders. That's our lens. And then we now drill down and see exactly who are these investors in person, and then we try to address exactly what they do. But we do all this having a framework in mind, because with ESG, you can be all over the place and not knowing exactly where to go. So you need something which can be sort of like your northern star. It guides you, tells you that don't get involved in this, but this is what's material to a real estate business. And for that, we use the Global Reporting Initiative, that's the GRS standard, but we also use the Sustainable Development Goals to be able to measure that particular impact. So it's a very busy landscape, as you will see in this slide right here. it's very busy, but when it came to now reporting to our investors in terms of which is the framework that we use or the standard, we settled for GRESB. So in full, GRESB stands for the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, developed in 2007, and basically it was investors and asset managers all coming together and saying, hey, how do we make sure that we compare oranges and oranges? How do we make sure that if we start to invest in properties, we are able to do that comparison? So what they did in 2007, they came up with GRESB. So GRESB is actually the biggest real estate. What happened to my slides? Okay, anyway, they'll come back. Which is where can they be able to compare one real estate asset over another one, both development assets, operational assets, and then subsequently even infrastructure assets. So you are able to compare. So if you are an investor, you don't need to really do a lot of time wasting or time taking activity to be able to know, but you just go to that one particular place, have an asset, and then compare it with your fellows. So that's what we decided to use. So if I may remember what comes next in the slide. Oh, yeah, here we are. Okay, so your typical GRESB assessment looks at various indicators. I know they're very tiny, maybe you cannot be able to see them, but they're divided into big major categories. So you have management, which basically speaks to governance. And it's a word, it's sort of like 30 points. And then you have assets which fall under operations, so they use the operational aspects and indicators. And then you also have development assets. So if you're developing assets, they are development indicators. So there are multiple indicators that really you look at. You don't need to like tick all of them, but there are some which you do. And then ultimately you are able to score yourself. And then once you score yourself, that score is kept by GRESB, and then another investor also does the same thing. So ultimately, you are able to know how you score in terms of, for example, the particular assets that you develop. Like in our case, we are strictly into purpose-built student accommodation. So we can be able to know how we perform in terms of other purpose-built student accommodation in Africa and also around the world. Now that's our peer group. So any investor who wants to impact student accommodation just goes to GRESB, looks at all of them, and then decides now which ones have a big impact, and then looks at their returns, and then compares, and then ultimately arrives at a decision. Yeah, but GRESB, of course, and any other rating systems, they feed on information, data, and that's why we normally say garbage in, garbage out. So you need to make sure that you have the right data. So the nuts and bolts of being able to do all that is the data that you release. So every property releases data. Even a person, you also release data. So data is it's all about how do you collect it, how do you transform your information, how do you report that particular data. So for us at Acorn, we normally use ARC platform. So ARC is a technology platform that measures, analyzes, scores the real world ESG performance assets of spaces. So why we chose ARC? Number one, of course, we didn't want a tool which is a financial burden to our cost. So it's actually a free tool to be able to use, but you normally, of course, have to pay for the reports to be generated, and those are the reports which we feed into GRESB. But at least it's free to be able to assess and measure your performance. You can upload as many properties as you want, so which means you have an opportunity yourself to be able to compare both externally and within your particular properties. So now it's at the property level. And then after getting information at the property level, that information at the property level is what we feed into GRESB, because GRESB takes information at the portfolio level. And now back to GRESB again, which we use. So I just wanted to show you this slide because it's a typical indicator. And this typical indicator can also be able to demonstrate the ambition of your ESG strategy and your ESG policy. You can be able to know whether you need to enhance them or you are at an international standard. For example, let's look at one of them which says ESG due diligence for new acquisition. Does your entity incorporate or perform ESG due diligence that covers, say, biodiversity, covers climate change, covers contamination, energy efficiency, energy supply? So it's a long laundry list of items. So you can tick 1, you can tick 2, you can tick 5, but ultimately it depends with how many you tick. But after you tick several, you'll realize that maybe would prefer to tick maybe 8 out of 10, because that way we will be material to our investors. So you have a choice, you have something to help you to see that. So every indicator typically looks like that. So out of all that, it helps you to enhance your governance documents, whether policies and everything else that features in that. So once all that information is available to you, what you do is that you upload it into the GRESB assessment. It's analyzed, it's scored, and the information that comes out is available to investors, or it can also not be available, but you can also make it available to your investors so that they can be able to see that a typical asset in a different country with similar returns, how does it perform in terms of sustainability? So for Acorn, basically that's what we do. And in a typical case study back in 2020 when we began ESG assessment using GRESB, is that we had to evaluate and go through all our policies, all our documents. We had to look at our strategy. We had to look at everything. So there were multiple documents that we benchmarked against GRESB. We saw where we needed to enhance our portfolio. We realized how we needed to set our goals. So basically, it's an exercise which will involve you to go through your documentation, go through your assets, see how they are performing, see what you have, see what you don't have, see what you need, see what your investors or the investors that you're targeting might need. And then based on that, you can be able to enhance your documentation. And that's exactly what we did. And then after that, of course, we subjected all that activity to the GRESB scoring system. We saw where we landed, and then eventually we came up with a gap analysis. And basically the gap analysis was to see where we are and what intervention measures we need to put in place so that we can now be able to transcend and move over to the next level. And that's what we did, and we've been implementing that. We've been implementing that gap analysis from time to time because there were some things which, of course, come at a cost. For example, integration of renewable energy. All our assets are green certified to the IFC EDGE standard. But now we wanted them to even be, we wanted to be more ambitious. For instance, like the assets which we're now certifying beginning of this year, starting with Aberdare Heights, which we call USIE 3, is actually EDGE Advanced Certified. So which means that the previous one was certified to the IFC EDGE 20%, now it's at 40%. And that's our target, and we want to do that for all the assets. For the other ones which we're not going to certify, but still they perform at the same level as the advanced one. Why? Because we are able to see that through the energy and water performance due to the tracking that we normally do using the ARC sustainability platform. So very quickly, after we do all that, of course, that data produces a lot of insights that we can be able to do, but I just wanted you to see this particular realm before I finish my presentation, is that when it comes to ESG reporting, we can be anywhere within this particular realm where we either are doing nothing or where we are integrating ESG but not reporting. That's another scenario where you're integrating ESG and also reporting, and then where you are doing ESG reporting and at the same time you're using that particular data from your insights to be able to make better decisions. For example, like right now, we can be able to tell that our water use intensity, for instance, is at 2.60 cubic meters, per square meter. We know that, and and that's the average. We can see that the properties that we initially developed used to do more than 3, but that told us something that at that particular time, the levels of sustainability were a bit lower, but now they've gone a bit higher. And the fixtures that we installed at that particular time, right now, we see them as inefficient. So that shows us how we've been able to transition, and the fixtures that are now coming in are even much more superior. They can even get us better outcomes. So the next step will be in our future assets, we will install those ones. And now we will start to see our water use intensity starting to come down. And that way we are able to communicate to our investors that we live in a water scarce country and we are conscious of the water that we consume. Even if we live in a place where we have plenty of water, how about using very little of it and then making the rest available, especially to the community that cannot be able to access potable water? So that's the story that we want to tell, and that's how we reach out to our investors, and that's all the kind of conversations that we have. So now, in my previous slide, I think I just wanted to share this with you, is that we are now analyzing information within Acorn. We're moving towards looking at financial information and also looking at sustainability information and seeing the relationship between the two. For example, this is just a case that I just wanted to share with you, where you can be able to look at 2 hotels, let's say you wanted to invest in them. And then the next question is, how do you know that this hotel is actually performing better in terms of maybe water and things like that? So this is, for example, a case study where maybe I was to ask that if I were to tell you that maybe company A is less likely than company B to face material impacts from environmental and climate risk, what piece of information will I be looking at? So typical financial information talks about the number of rooms, for example, that you have. Let's say it's a hotel. But then, when it comes to sustainability, we look at, say, the water use, the extraction, especially like from high-risk areas. So now the question is, of the 2 assets, who is actually doing poorly? So you realize when it comes to that, in the first question is the percentage of revenue from coastal region. So you look at the 2 hotels. They have hotels, say, in coastal region and other upland areas, and then you try to notice which one is actually performing poorly, which one will be exposed. So now these are the kind of questions investment analysts tend to look at in terms of climate risk-related incidences. And that's how they determine. So the most important thing is to make your sustainability numbers look as pretty as possible, so that when they come in to do the normalization to be able to assess and understand how they perform, they'll be in a better position to make sure that your asset performs much more better. So out of time. No, actually this is my last slide. So this was just a little bit of emphasis that with these numbers, you can look at so many indicators. We can't go through them right now, but if we're just to sit down here and analyze in terms of energy intensity, water intensity, which are more climate related or more climate exposed, that number can give you as many as 12 decision points that investors look at. So that's my parting shot for now. Thank you.
Let's appreciate him with a clap. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just before you leave, just hold the mic. I think there's a question that I wanted us to check on. And thank you. At least I was quite generous. I even was asking whether there's another slide. Let's see whether there's one more. It's extended, I think. Just remove the extension so we can see. There was one on ESG. Someone was asking about whether they need to consider all. Should I consider all ESG elements on my project, or can one be enough? That is, can I choose E, S, or G? Or do you tell us?
Well, ESG has to be relevant because you don't do it in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. You do it because it matters not just to yourself but also to somebody else. So the question is, who does it matter to you? So based on who it matters to you, you'll find yourself doing E, S, and G. But then again, you might find yourself doing E, S, and G. And why is that? It's because at times, what might look like an environmental issue may not necessarily be an environmental issue, but the environmental impact is just a derivative of, say, maybe better governance or poor governance. A very good example was some incident that happened at Nakuru Park, where there was a lot of litter, and the place was so dirty, and people are saying that Nakuru doesn't take care of its environment. But when we analyze properly, it was all because there was an absence of a proper management system of how do you manage this number of people when they come to your property. So what happened is that there wasn't proper sized waste bins that could be able to accommodate waste from all those people. So what the hell do you expect? It will overflow and the other litter will go into the space. So it was all about management. I mean, management falls under governance. So it was never an environmental issue, it was a governance issue. That's just one example.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. There's one more question, and because we had two speakers on it, I wanted you to tackle this one. How do you deal with the risk of greenwashing, especially to give assurance to investors? And if you have any other comment on that, ESOG, you could say something very quickly before Ella.
We normally restrict ourselves to standards, especially standards which the key stakeholders look at. For example, if I want to say that my property is green, I won't just install solar and say it's green, but I'll go to one of the green building rating systems out there, whether it's LEED, IFC Edge, or Green Star, and then I subject my property to that standard, see where I land, and there I can be able to speak authoritatively whether mine is green or not. And if it's not green, I'll say, yes, it's not green, but this is what I need to do to make it green.
All right. Let's appreciate him with a clap. Let's appreciate him with a clap.